Emily drove slowly along the familiar streets of suburban Boston, the sunlight filtering through the leafy canopy above. After 3 years in New York, where she spent more time shopping and partying than studying, coming home felt strange. The house appeared in view, a large, elegant, colonial-style home surrounded by a meticulously maintained garden. As she pulled into the driveway, her mother, Linda, stood waiting on the porch. Linda, once a renowned violinist, now had an air of refined elegance, but carried a hint of melancholy in her eyes. "Emily, darling, I've missed you so much," Linda exclaimed, rushing forward to embrace her daughter. "Hi, Mom," Emily replied, her voice lacking enthusiasm. She returned the hug, but quickly pulled away, eager to escape the emotional display. Linda's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "How was the drive? Did you have any trouble?" "It was fine. Long, but fine," Emily answered, her tone indifferent. Linda led Emily inside, where the air was cool and filled with the faint scent of flowers. "Your father will be thrilled to see you. He's been looking forward to this for weeks." "Yeah, I'm sure," Emily muttered under her breath, not quite convinced. They walked into the spacious living room, tastefully decorated with family photos and art pieces. Michael, her father, was descending the grand staircase, his face lit up with genuine happiness when he saw Emily. "Emily, welcome home!" Michael's voice boomed with joy. He reached the bottom of the stairs and enveloped her in a bear hug. "Hi, Dad," Emily said, trying to muster a smile but feeling suffocated by his embrace. "I'm so glad you're back. We have so much to catch up on," Michael said, finally letting her go. "Why don't you freshen up and we'll have a nice dinner together?" "Sure," Emily replied, grabbing her suitcase and heading upstairs. She entered her old room, which remained untouched since she left. It felt like stepping back in time. She tossed her suitcase on the bed and looked around, a mix of emotions swirling within her. The familiarity of the room was comforting, yet she felt a growing sense of unease. She knew her parents had high expectations for her, and she had spent the last 3 years doing everything but meeting those expectations. Downstairs, Linda and Michael exchanged a look. "She's changed," Linda said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "She just needs time to readjust," Michael reassured her, though he couldn't hide his own concern. At dinner, the atmosphere was strained. The table was set beautifully and the food smelled delicious, but Emily picked at her plate, barely eating. "How was New York?" Michael asked, trying to break the ice. "It was all right," Emily replied, not elaborating. "Did you make any friends? Find anything you liked doing?" Linda inquired, hoping to spark some interest. "I guess," Emily said with a shrug. "Mostly just hung out." Michael frowned slightly. "We hoped you would take advantage of all the opportunities there, maybe even decide on a career path." Emily felt the pressure mounting. "I know what you hoped, Dad," she snapped, surprising herself with her tone. "But it's my life." An awkward silence fell over the table. Linda reached out, placing a hand on Michael's arm to calm him. "We just want you to be happy and successful," Linda said gently. Emily sighed, pushing her plate away. "I know, Mom. It's just, I need some time to figure things out." "Of course," Linda said, forcing a smile. "Take all the time you need." After dinner, Emily retreated to her room, feeling overwhelmed. She knew her parents loved her, but their expectations felt like a heavy burden. Lying on her bed, she stared at the ceiling, wondering how she would navigate the path ahead. Meanwhile, downstairs, Linda and Michael sat in the living room, their worry growing. "She'll find her way," Michael said, more to reassure himself than Linda. "I hope so," Linda whispered, her heart aching for her daughter. Emily's return home was meant to be a joyous occasion, but It only highlighted the growing rift between her and her parents. The house was buzzing with activity as guests arrived for the party. Michael had gone all out, inviting friends, family, and colleagues to welcome Emily back home. The living room was filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses as people mingled. Emily stood by the window feeling slightly out of place. She had changed into a simple yet elegant dress, but her mind was still in New York. She watched as her father greeted guests with his usual charm, his booming laughter filling the room. "Emily, come over here," Michael called out, waving her over. She sighed and made her way through the crowd, putting on a polite smile. "Emily, this is Mark. He's one of my colleagues. Mark, this is my daughter, Emily." Michael introduced them, a hint of pride in his voice. Mark turned to face her, a charming smile on his lips. He was tall, with dark hair and a confident demeanor that immediately drew Emily's attention. "Nice to meet you, Emily," Mark said, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you too," Emily replied, shaking his hand. She felt a strange flutter in her chest as their eyes met. "Your father speaks very highly of you," Mark continued, his gaze steady and somewhat intense. "Does he?" Emily responded, glancing at her father, who was already talking to someone else. Mark chuckled. "He does. So, how was New York?" "It was interesting," Emily said, not wanting to delve into details. "Different from here?" "I can imagine," Mark said, nodding. "New York has its own charm, but there's something comforting about coming back home, isn't there?" Emily shrugged. "I suppose. It's just different." They fell into an easy conversation, talking about everything from New York's nightlife to Boston's quieter charm. Emily found herself relaxing, genuinely enjoying the conversation. As the night went on, Emily and Mark continued to talk, moving from the living room to the quieter corners of the house. They discovered shared interests, laughed at each other's stories, and slowly, Emily felt a connection growing. Michael, however, was watching from a distance, his expression slowly shifting from pride to concern. He had hoped Emily would find her footing back home, but seeing her so engaged with Mark, a man much older than her, worried him. "Everything all right?" Linda asked, coming up beside Michael. "I'm not sure," Michael replied, nodding towards Emily and Mark. "Do you think I'm overreacting?" Linda followed his gaze. "She's an adult, Michael. She needs to make her own choices." "I know, but Mark, he's not exactly the kind of man I envisioned for her," Michael admitted. Linda sighed. "Let her figure it out. We can't protect her from everything." Michael nodded, though his worry didn't fade. Meanwhile, Emily and Mark stepped out onto the patio, where the cool evening air was a welcome relief from the crowded house. "So, what are your plans now that you're back?" Mark asked, leaning against the railing. "Honestly, I don't know," Emily confessed. "I've been avoiding thinking about it." Mark nodded, understanding. "Sometimes it takes time to figure things out. Don't rush it." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of relief at his words. "Thanks. It's just hard, you know. Everyone has these expectations." "Yeah, I get that," Mark said softly. "But you don't have to live up to anyone else's expectations. Just focus on what makes you happy." Emily looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and curiosity in her eyes. "You seem to have it all figured out." Mark laughed. "Trust me, I'm just as clueless as anyone else. But I've learned to take things one step at a time." As the party wound down, Michael watched Emily and Mark, his concern deepening. He knew he couldn't control Emily's choices, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this new relationship could complicate things further. Emily, however, felt a sense of excitement and anticipation. She didn't know where this new connection would lead, but she was willing to find out. The two found solace in each other's company, away from the prying eyes of her parents and their social circle. Emily's visits to Mark's house in the quiet suburbs of Boston became more frequent. Mark's house was a stark contrast to her family's home, modern, sleek, and filled with all the luxuries Emily could desire. One evening, as they sat on the patio overlooking Mark's manicured garden, he turned to her with a serious expression. "Emily, have you thought about moving in here? Permanently?" Emily was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I mean leave your parents' house and come live with me. You'd be happier here, don't you think?" She hesitated, knowing how her parents would react, but the idea of independence and living in luxury was tempting. "I don't know, Mark. My parents would freak out." "You're an adult, Emily. You can make your own decisions, and I want you here, with me," Mark said, his tone firm yet caring. That night, Emily made up her mind. She packed her things, leaving a brief note for her parents, and drove to Mark's house. When Michael and Linda found the note, they were shocked and worried. A few days later, Michael decided it was time to confront the situation. He called Emily, asking her to come home for a family dinner. Emily reluctantly agreed, knowing a confrontation was inevitable. The dinner was tense from the start. Michael and Linda exchanged worried glances, while Emily picked at her food, waiting for the inevitable discussion. "So, you're living with Mark now?" Michael finally asked, his voice strained. "Yes, I am," Emily replied, trying to sound confident. "Why, Emily? Why would you make such a decision without even discussing it with us?" Linda's voice was filled with hurt. "I'm an adult, Mom. I don't need your permission for everything," Emily snapped, her patience wearing thin. "We're worried about you," Michael said, his tone softening. "Mark is much older, and this relationship, it doesn't seem right." "You don't know him like I do," Emily retorted. "He cares about me and he makes me happy." "Emily, it's not about his age. It's about your well-being. Moving in with him so suddenly is a big step." "Are you sure it's what you want?" Linda pleaded. "Yes, it is," Emily insisted, standing up. "And I don't need your approval." Michael stood up too, his face red with anger. "Emily, this is not the way to handle things. Running away and living with someone you barely know is irresponsible." "Irresponsible? You've never trusted me to make my own decisions," Emily shouted. "You always think you know what's best for me, but you don't. You don't understand me at all." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "Emily, we love you. We just want you to be safe and happy." "Well, maybe your version of happiness isn't the same as mine," Emily said coldly. "I'm living my life the way I want. And if you can't accept that, then maybe I don't belong here anymore." With that, Emily stormed out of the house, leaving Michael and Linda in stunned silence. She drove back to Mark's house, her mind racing with a mix of anger and sadness. Mark was waiting for her. "How did it go?" he asked, concern in his eyes. "It went as expected," Emily replied, her voice trembling. "They don't understand. They never will." Mark pulled her into a comforting embrace. "It's okay. You're here now. This is your home." Emily clung to him, feeling a sense of relief. She knew she had hurt her parents, but she also felt a newfound sense of freedom. Living with Mark meant living on her own terms, and for now, that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and Emily adapted to her new life with Mark. She enjoyed the luxury, the freedom, and the attention Mark showered on her. Yet deep down, there was a lingering guilt about the way she had left things with her parents. Michael and Linda, on the other hand, were left to cope with their daughter's abrupt departure. They worried about her, but knew they had to give her the space to make her own choices. It was a difficult, painful process, but they hoped Emily would find her way back to them eventually. Emily's new life was a whirlwind of emotions and experiences. She was living the high life, but the cost of her decisions weighed heavily on her mind. Only time would tell if she had made the right choice. The call came early in the morning, jolting Emily from her sleep. She fumbled for her phone, blinking at the unfamiliar number. "Hello?" she answered, her voice groggy. "Is this Emily?" a voice asked. "This is Dr. Sanders from Massachusetts General Hospital. I'm calling about Mark." Emily sat up, her heart pounding. "What happened?" "Mark was in a car accident last night. He's in critical condition and currently in a coma." Emily's mind went blank. "Is he going to be okay?" she managed to ask. "It's too early to tell," Dr. Sanders replied. "You should come to the hospital as soon as you can." Emily hung up and stared at the ceiling, trying to process the information. After a moment, she swung her legs out of bed and got dressed, her movements mechanical. She grabbed her keys and headed out the door, her mind still in a haze. The drive to the hospital felt surreal. Traffic was light, and the city seemed quiet, almost peaceful. Emily's thoughts were a jumble, flipping between disbelief and dread. When she arrived at Massachusetts General, she found the ICU and approached the nurses' station. "I'm here to see Mark," she said, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. The nurse nodded and led her to a room. "Dr. Sanders will be with you shortly." Emily entered the room and saw Mark lying motionless on the bed, hooked up to a maze of machines. She felt a strange disconnect, as if she were watching a scene from a movie rather than living it. Dr. Sanders entered the room, his expression serious. "Emily, Mark sustained significant injuries. We're doing everything we can, but it will be a while before we know more." "Thank you," Emily said, her voice flat. She sat down in a chair by the bed, staring at Mark's pale face. She didn't know what to feel: anger, fear, sorrow. It all seemed distant and unreal. Hours passed and Emily's mind wandered. She thought about the past few weeks, living in luxury, feeling invincible. Now, everything had changed. She knew she should be devastated, but instead she felt numb. A nurse entered to check Mark's vitals, glancing at Emily with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Do you need anything?" she asked. "No, I'm fine," Emily replied, her tone polite but detached. As the day turned into evening, Emily decided to go home. She couldn't bear the sterile hospital atmosphere any longer. She left her number with the nurse and promised to return the next day. Back at Mark's house, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her as she stepped inside. The familiar surroundings provided a strange comfort. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat down on the sofa, trying to make sense of her emotions. Mark's accident had thrown her life into turmoil, but she realized she didn't feel the deep, overwhelming grief she thought she should. Instead, she felt a sense of freedom, a chance to step back and reassess her life. Days turned into weeks, and Mark remained in a coma. Emily visited the hospital less frequently, finding it increasingly difficult to maintain a facade of concern. She resumed her routine, shopping, dining out, and enjoying the luxuries Mark's wealth provided. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, the phone rang. It was the hospital. "Emily, it's Dr. Sanders. Mark's condition hasn't improved. We need to discuss the next steps." Emily listened, feeling a pang of guilt for her lack of emotion. "I'll come by tomorrow," she said. After hanging up, she stared out the window, contemplating her next move. She knew she should feel more, but the truth was, she didn't miss Mark as much as she missed the security he provided. Emily sat in the hospital waiting room, tapping her foot impatiently. It had been weeks since Mark's accident, and his condition hadn't improved. She took a deep breath and stood up, heading towards Dr. Sanders' office. It was time to make a decision. "Dr. Sanders," she said, knocking on the open door. "Can we talk?" The doctor looked up, his expression serious. "Of course, Emily. Come in." Emily sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time to let him go. I don't want him to suffer." Dr. Sanders nodded, his face somber. "It's a difficult decision, but I understand. If you feel that's what's best, we can discuss it further." Just as Emily was about to respond, the door burst open and a young woman rushed in. "No, you can't do that!" Emily turned, startled. "Who are you?" "I'm Ellie," the woman said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I'm Mark's daughter." Emily's eyes widened. "Mark never mentioned he had a daughter." "That doesn't matter right now," Ellie snapped. "What matters is that you're not making any decisions about my father without me." Dr. Sanders stood up, trying to calm the situation. "Ellie, why don't you sit down and we can talk this through?" Ellie shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, I won't sit down. This woman is trying to kill my father." Emily felt her own anger rising. "I'm not trying to kill him, I'm trying to do what's best for him." "You don't even know him," Ellie shot back. "You don't know what he would want." "Enough," Dr. Sanders said firmly. "We need to handle this calmly. Ellie, why don't you tell us what you think should happen?" Ellie took a deep breath, wiping her tears. "He's my father. I won't give up on him. There's still a chance he could wake up. I want to keep him on life support." Emily stared at her, feeling a mix of frustration and helplessness. "Do you really think that's what he would want? To be kept alive by machines?" Ellie's eyes flashed with anger. "Yes, I do. And until he wakes up and can tell us himself, I'm not letting you make any decisions." Dr. Sanders interjected. "Emily, Ellie has a legal right to be involved in this decision. We need to take her wishes into account." Emily felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. She had thought she was doing the right thing, but now she wasn't so sure. "Fine," she said tightly, "but I'm not happy about this." "You don't have to be happy," Ellie said coldly. "You just have to respect it." The tension in the room was palpable as Dr. Sanders tried to mediate. "Let's take a step back. Ellie, why don't you spend some time with your father and think about what he would want? Emily, I suggest you do the same." Emily nodded curtly and left the office, feeling Ellie's glare on her back. She walked down the hall to Mark's room, her mind racing. She had never felt more out of control. When she reached the room, she saw Ellie already there, holding Mark's hand and talking to him softly. Emily felt a pang of jealousy. She had thought she was the closest person to Mark, but clearly Ellie had a deep bond with him. Emily stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Finally, she turned and walked away. She needed to think, to figure out what her next move would be. As she left the hospital, she realized that Ellie's arrival had changed everything. The decision was no longer just hers to make. She had to consider Ellie's feelings and wishes, no matter how much it frustrated her. Emily drove back to Mark's house, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She felt threatened by Ellie's presence, but she also understood her determination to save her father. Back at the house, Emily poured herself a drink and sat down, staring into the glass. She had been so sure of what to do, but now everything was uncertain. The sterile scent of the hospital room had become all too familiar to Ellie. She sat beside her father's bed, holding his hand, talking to him softly. Weeks had turned into months, and her hope for his recovery had never wavered. One morning, As the sunlight filtered through the blinds, Mark's fingers twitched. Ellie sat up, her heart pounding. "Dad? Can you hear me?" Mark's eyes fluttered open and he looked around, disoriented. "Ellie?" His voice was weak, but it was unmistakable. "Dad! You're awake!" Ellie cried, tears streaming down her face. She pressed the call button for the nurse, barely able to contain her relief. The medical staff rushed in, checking his vitals and assessing his condition. Dr. Sanders arrived shortly after, his expression one of cautious optimism. "Welcome back, Mark," he said. "You've been through a lot, but you're a fighter." As the days passed, Mark's strength gradually returned. Ellie stayed by his side, helping him with his recovery. She filled him in on everything that had happened, including the difficult conversations with Emily. "She wanted to pull the plug," Ellie said one afternoon, her voice tinged with anger. "She said it was for your own good, but I couldn't let her do it." Mark listened, his brow furrowing. "Emily? I trusted her. She was living in your house, enjoying your money," Ellie continued. "But when things got tough, she wanted to give up on you." Mark's heart ached with betrayal. He had cared for Emily, thought she was someone he could rely on. Now, it seemed she had only been using him. "I need to talk to her," he said finally. Ellie nodded, squeezing his hand. "I'll call her." When Emily arrived at the hospital, she was a bundle of nerves. She had hoped Mark wouldn't wake up, but now that he had, she wasn't sure what to expect. As she entered his room, the tension was palpable. "Mark," she said softly, approaching his bed. "I'm so glad you're awake." Mark's eyes were cold. "Emily, we need to talk." She swallowed hard, sitting down. "Of course." "I trusted you," Mark began, his voice filled with hurt. "Ellie told me what you wanted to do. You were ready to let me die." Emily felt a wave of guilt. "I thought it was the right thing to do. The doctors said you might not wake up." "But you didn't even wait," Mark said, his eyes narrowing. "You were living in my house, spending my money, and when things got hard, you wanted to walk away." "It wasn't like that," Emily protested, tears welling up. "I was scared. I didn't know what to do." "You made your choice," Mark said firmly, "and now I'm making mine. I want you out of my house. We're done." Emily's heart sank. "Mark, please, I was confused. I didn't mean to hurt you." "It's too late for that," Mark replied, turning away. Emily stood up, her legs shaky. I'm sorry, Mark. I really am." "Get out," Mark said, his voice filled with finality. Emily left the hospital in a daze, her mind racing. She had lost everything: Mark, the house, the life she had grown accustomed to. The drive back to her parents' house was quiet. Emily replayed the conversation with Mark over and over in her head, each word cutting deeper than the last. She felt like a failure, and the thought of facing her parents filled her with dread. But she had nowhere else to go. When she pulled into the driveway, she saw her father, Michael, waiting on the porch. His expression was unreadable, and Emily's heart pounded as she got out of the car. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily," Michael replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Come inside." Emily followed him into the house, where her mother, Linda, was waiting in the living room. The house smelled of freshly baked cookies, a scent that used to bring her comfort. Now, it just made her feel more out of place. "Sit down," Linda said, patting the seat next to her. Emily sat, her hands trembling. She looked at her parents, the weight of her mistakes pressing down on her. "I'm so sorry," she began, tears welling up in her eyes. "I messed up. I hurt Mark, and I hurt you both. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Michael sighed, his face softening. "Emily, We know you've made mistakes, but you're our daughter, and we love you. We want to help you." Linda reached out, taking Emily's hand. "We forgive you, sweetheart. What's important now is that you're here, and we can start over." Emily broke down, the relief washing over her. "Thank you," she sobbed. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." Michael wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Everyone makes mistakes, Emily. What matters is that you learn from them and move forward." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. She had been so consumed by guilt and shame that she hadn't allowed herself to think about the future. Now, with her parents' support, she felt like she could start to rebuild. The next few days were a blur of emotional conversations and tentative steps towards a new routine. Emily helped around the house, something she hadn't done in years. It felt strange, but also grounding. One evening, as they were having dinner, Michael spoke up. "Emily, have you thought about what you want to do next?" Emily paused, considering his question. "I don't know, Dad. I feel lost." "That's okay," Linda said, giving her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one day at a time." Emily nodded, appreciating their patience. "I think I want to go back to school," she said finally. "Finish my degree. Maybe find a job." Michael and Linda exchanged a hopeful glance. "That sounds like a good plan," Michael said. "We'll support you every step of the way." The next morning, Emily sat down with her parents to make a list of potential schools and job opportunities. It was the first time in a long while that she felt a sense of purpose. As the weeks turned into months, Emily slowly rebuilt her life. Emily stood at the gates of Boston University, a mixture of nerves and excitement bubbling inside her. She took a deep breath, adjusting her backpack. It had been a long journey to get here, but she was ready to embrace this new chapter of her life. The first few weeks were challenging. Emily had been out of the academic environment for a while, and it took time to adjust to the demands of college life. She spent long hours in the library, catching up on reading and assignments, determined to succeed. One evening, as she was working on a particularly difficult paper, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her mother, Linda. "How's it going, sweetie? Need any help?" Emily smiled, typing a quick response. "It's tough, but I'm managing. Thanks for checking in." At home, Michael and Linda watched as Emily threw herself into her studies. They had never seen her so focused and driven. Every evening they would sit together and discuss her day, offering encouragement and advice. "Remember to take breaks," Michael advised one night over dinner. "You don't want to burn out." "I will, Dad," Emily assured him, though she knew she had to push herself to keep up. The months passed and Emily found her rhythm. She made friends, joined study groups, and even participated in a few campus activities. She began to feel like she was part of something bigger, and it gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. Her hard work paid off. As the semester came to an end, Emily's grades were among the highest in her class. She felt a surge of pride as she showed her report card to her parents. "You did it!" Linda exclaimed, hugging her tightly. "We're so proud of you, Emily." Michael nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "You've worked so hard, and it shows. Keep it up." Encouraged by her success, Emily continued to push herself. She took on more challenging courses, balancing her academic workload with a part-time job at a local bookstore. The job provided a welcome break from studying and allowed her to interact with a variety of people. One afternoon, while arranging books on a shelf, Emily overheard a conversation between two customers. They were discussing a community service project that involved tutoring underprivileged kids. Intrigued, she approached them after her shift. "Hi, I couldn't help but overhear. Can you tell me more about the tutoring program?" she asked. The customers, a middle-aged woman named Susan and a young man named Jack, were more than happy to explain. "We volunteer at a local community center," Susan said. "We help kids with their homework and organize activities for them. It's very rewarding." Emily felt a spark of interest. "That sounds amazing. How can I get involved?" Jack smiled. "We meet every Saturday morning. You're welcome to join us." The following Saturday, Emily found herself at the community center, surrounded by eager faces. She quickly realized how much she enjoyed helping the kids and how much they needed support. It gave her a new perspective on life and a deeper sense of fulfillment. As her college years progressed, Emily continued to excel academically while making a positive impact through her volunteer work. She forged strong connections with her professors and peers, building a network that would support her future endeavors. Finally, the day came when Emily donned her cap and gown, standing among her fellow graduates. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she glanced out into the audience. Michael and Linda were there, beaming with pride. After the ceremony, they embraced, tears of joy in their eyes. "We always knew you could do it," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to you both," Emily replied, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without your support." As they celebrated together, Emily reflected on how far she had come. She had transformed from a lost and confused young woman into a determined and capable adult. Her journey had been filled with challenges, but each one had made her stronger. With her degree in hand and a bright future ahead, Emily knew she was ready to take on the world. She had learned the value of hard work, the importance of giving back, and the strength that comes from a loving and supportive family. This was just the beginning. Emily stood in the kitchen of her cozy home in the suburbs of Boston, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The house was modest but warm, a stark contrast to the opulence she once knew. She glanced at the clock, knowing John would be home soon from his shift at the local hardware store. The past few years had been transformative for Emily. Her life was simple but rich with meaning. She had met John, a kind and hard-working. They had married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. "Hey, honey, I'm home," John called out as he stepped through the door, a smile spreading across his face when he saw Emily. "Hi, love," Emily replied, walking over to give him a kiss. "How was your day?" "Busy, but good. We finally finished that big project," John said, setting down his lunchbox and shrugging off his jacket. "How about you?" "It was great. The kids were so engaged today. We did a science experiment, and they loved it," Emily said, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. John chuckled. "You always know how to make learning fun for them." They settled into their usual evening routine, preparing dinner together and catching up on their day. As they sat down to eat, Emily felt a deep sense of contentment wash over her. This was the life she had always wanted, but never knew she needed. After dinner, they took a walk around their neighborhood, hand in hand. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun set, casting a warm glow over everything. They talked about their dreams and plans for the future, both feeling grateful for the journey that had brought them here. Later, as they relaxed on the couch, Emily reflected on how much her life had changed. She had learned that true happiness didn't come from wealth or luxury, but from the simple, genuine moments shared with the loved ones. John had shown her that love and kindness were the most valuable treasures of all. "John, I was thinking," Emily began, turning to look at him. "Remember how we talked about starting a family?" John's eyes softened. "Of course I do. Are you ready?" "I think so." Emily said, her voice steady. "I feel like we're in a good place and I want to share this happiness with our own children." John smiled, pulling her close. "I can't wait, Emily. You're going to be an amazing mother." In the months that followed, Emily and John began preparing for the next chapter of their lives. They painted a nursery, picked out baby names, and attended parenting classes. Their excitement grew with each passing day, knowing they were building a future filled with love. When Emily found out she was pregnant, she couldn't wait to share the news with her parents. Michael and Linda were overjoyed, thrilled at the prospect of becoming grandparents. They visited often, helping with preparations and offering support. One sunny afternoon, as Emily and John sat on their porch, Michael and Linda joined them. They reminisced about the past and looked forward to the future, their bond stronger than ever. "We're so proud of you, Emily," Michael said, his voice filled with emotion. "You've come such a long way." "Thanks, Dad," Emily replied, squeezing his hand. "I couldn't have done it without you and Mom." Linda smiled, her eyes glistening. "You've made us so happy. We're grateful to see you living a life filled with love." Emily felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had found her way back to herself, embraced by the love of her family and the support of her husband. She knew that challenges would come, but she was ready to face them, surrounded by the people who mattered most. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily rested her head on John's shoulder, feeling their baby kick for the first time. It was a moment of pure joy, a testament to the life they had built together. In that simple, heartfelt moment, Emily knew she had found true happiness. It wasn't about wealth or status, but about love, family, and the small, precious moments that made life beautiful. She was home, and she was truly happy.